Hello everyone, welcome to this video where we'll give an overview of methods in Java and work on a few examples. For this video, I have a starter project with our usual main class, and I've also created a rectangle calculator class that we're going to use for this example. At the moment, this rectangle calculator class is empty. I haven't defined any fields or any methods. In this video, we're going to assume that we've been asked to solve the following problem. We're given a rectangle of a certain width and height, and we need to print out the ratio of the perimeter and the area of that rectangle. So the perimeter of the rectangle is just the sum of the sides, so 2 times the width plus 2 times the height, so 2 times width plus height basically. And the area is just the width times the height. What we're being asked to print is the value of the perimeter divided by the area. So, for example, for a rectangle of 4 by 3, the perimeter is 14, and the area is 12, and the ratio is 14 divided 12, which is roughly about 1.17. Okay, so in our project, we could simply implement the formulas that we just saw in our main method. So let's assume that we have a rectangle from the example, so that is a rectangle of width 4 and height 3. And here we're using double as the type, which is a primitive data type similar to int that allows us to store decimal values. So we can, for example, do 4.5 or 4.0 in our case. We will define a perimeter variable that is twice the width plus the height, as we saw in the formulas. And we're also going to define a variable that is called area, that is basically the width times the height. And finally, we're going to define a ratio that is just basically the division of the perimeter divided the area. And we're going to print out that ratio. So let's run the program and let's see what we get. And excellent, we get 1.16. So we implemented a solution for our problem, but the way our program is written right now doesn't help us if we need to do the same operation for rectangles of multiple sizes. So let's assume that we want to do the same calculation for 2 or 3 rectangles of different sizes. So we could, although this is not recommended, copy and paste the code and repeat the calculation with the different sizes. But again, this isn't ideal. Software design is a topic outside of the scope of this course, but if we duplicated the code here, we would have a higher chance of introducing errors or bugs. So for example, if I copy paste the code, I need to remove all these doubles because the variables have already been defined. And let's say that now we have a rectangle of 5 by 7. There could be a typo in one of these copies of the code. So even something very simple, someone could make a mistake and put erroneous code in one of these copies. And in terms of responsibility, the main class doesn't sound like a good owner or responsible for the calculations of areas and perimeters of rectangles. In any case, another alternative for the purpose of this example is to move this logic to a method in a separate class. Methods allow us to group multiple instructions or statements that fulfill a task and to execute them as a callable unit. And that's where the rectangle calculator class I created comes into play. So let's remove this code. And in the rectangle calculator, we can define a perimeter to area ratio method. So we can do public double perimeter to area ratio. And this method should receive the width and also the height of the rectangle. And this method should calculate the values for us. When declaring methods in Java, as we've seen in a couple of examples before, there are a few things to bear in mind. One of them is the return type of our method. It tells Java what type of data the method is going to return when it's called. In our case, we're going to return a decimal value, so we're going to use double here. The next thing is the name of the method. The name can be anything we want really. It is for us to determine what a method should be called. However, choose a method name that is descriptive and clear. Not too long, not too short, just what it is providing. For example, we could have named our method calculate. This is a valid method name in Java, and Java will of course allow it, but it doesn't tell us anything. Remember that as developers, we spend more time reading code than writing code. It could be a different developer in your team or company trying to understand your code, or even you in a few months' time. Remember to make your code readable. After the method name, so let's move this back. After the method name, always in parentheses, we have the inputs to our method. These are called the parameters. As you can see in this example, we can have more than one parameter. And as we saw in the airplane class example, we can have methods with no parameters. Every parameter is a variable inside our method. So, as with all variables, they need to define a type and a name. And lastly, for this example, we want our method to be public, to be able to call it from other places in our project. So let's go ahead and implement the method. So we're gonna calculate the perimeter, which is basically 2 times the width plus the height. We're also gonna calculate the area, which is the width times the height. We're gonna calculate the ratio, which is basically the perimeter, the perimeter divided the area. We want to return the ratio. So this is the value, this is the result that is gonna be returned when we call this method from other places in our code. Now, on our main method, we can make use of the rectangle calculator that we just created. So instead of doing the calculations here, I just want to call the method and get the ratio. So first of all, let's create our calculator object. So I'm going to say rectangle calculator equals a new rectangle calculator. So I'm going to create a new object. And then I'm going to remove all of this code. I'm going to define a ratio variable, and I'm going to assign it the value of invoking our calculation method, the perimeter to area ratio, with a rectangle of width 4 and height 3. And now we're going to print the ratio as well. Now, if we need this ratio for rectangles of other sizes, we can just basically call the same method with different parameters. So instead of a rectangle of 4 by 3, we can do it for a rectangle of 5 by 10, for example, and we can print that out as well. Okay, this time, instead of running the project normally, I want us to run it in debug mode. So let's add a breakpoint in the line where we call the calculator method for the first time and run the code in debug mode. Now, in the debugger window, next to the step over option that we've used in the last couple of videos, you're going to see that we also have a step into option. With this option, we are asking the debugger to execute this line of code. So it's going to execute the ratio equals calculator.perimeter to area ratio. But we're asking the debugger to pause in the first line of the method being invoked. So let's click on it. We will be taken automatically into the first line of our calculation method. And we can also see the variables of this method in the debugger window. So far, the only variables that we have are the parameters of the method, which is basically our width and height. Now, let's click on the step over option until we reach the return ratio statement. As we execute the lines of code, we can see that the different variables are appearing in the debugger window. Once we execute the return statement, the program will return to the method that called the calculator. In our case, we know that it is the main method. The debugger also shows us this information in the debugger window. You will see that the method perimeter to area ratio is above the main method. This over here is called the call stack and represents the active methods. That is, the ones that haven't completed execution and the order in which they've been invoked. In our case, there is nothing below main, as that is the entry point to our application. So let's click on a step over to execute the return statement. The IDE should automatically take you to the main method again, and you will see that the perimeter to area ratio method has been removed from our call stack, as it has completed its execution. Excellent. Now let's complete the execution of the program, and we're going to see that the ratios have been printed out as we would expect. So to recap, in this video, we define methods as callable units that group multiple statements to fulfill a task. We saw an additional example of methods in Java and provided a bit more detail into what methods are and how they can be of use to us when writing applications. We created a simple method that receives parameters and returns a value based on those inputs. We also saw how to call that method and receive and use the returned value. And we also provided an example of how to debug code where we have methods being invoked. And that's it for this video, guys. We hope you found that useful. Thanks for watching, everyone.